Tired of showing up to gatherings with ho-hum grocery store bottles? Here's a secret. Some of the best wines by top independent producers aren't sitting on those shelves, but unless you know where to look, you'll probably never find them. That's where Sommsation comes in. Their team of top-tier sommeliers curates exceptional, high-quality wines that'll make you the hero of your next dinner party. From perfectly chosen bottles to wine club memberships and even private tastings, Sommsation makes it simple to elevate every occasion. Don't settle for ordinary wine. You deserve better. Discover more at sommsation.com/wine enthusiast.
Welcome to the Wine Enthusiast podcast, your serving of drinks culture and the people who drive it. I'm Jake Abrams, assistant editor at Wine Enthusiast. Today we're talking to writer-at-large Emily Saladino, who reviews wines from Croatia, Greece, Georgia, Hungary, and Lebanon for Wine Enthusiast. In a recent article for the Washington Post, Emily tasted and reviewed 9 Trader Joe's wines that offer quality and balance without breaking the bank. As other grocery store wine brands like Costco and Aldi boom in popularity, it's important to realize that, for a lot of people, this is where most wine shopping actually occurs. Let's dig into how Emily went about tasting these wines, what surprised her, and what this all says about how Americans drink today. Okay, Emily, thanks for joining. So let's dive into the piece that you wrote for the Washington Post. Could you walk us through that briefly?
Sure. I wrote an article for the Washington Post that's basically a user's guide to shopping for wine at Trader Joe's. It's a grocery store that many of us know and love because it tends to have fairly low prices and a lot of private label products that are only sold at Trader Joe's. So the piece goes into why there are certain wines that you'll only see at Trader Joe's, and then how to navigate a section that can be challenging, whether you're super knowledgeable about wine or not. And so then at the end, there's a list of bottles after a pretty comprehensive, I'd like to think, tasting of Trader Joe's wine, a couple that I recommend because I tasted them and would happily serve them in my own home to my own guests.
So how did you settle on those bottles at Trader Joe's?
I purchased 23 bottles, and I believe the piece has 9 recommendations. So it's a pretty good percentage, right? Like that's almost, it's more
That's
than
a
a
good hit
third.
rate, for sure.
Yeah, that's not bad. And so when I was shopping in Trader Joe's for these wines to taste, I tried to get a variety. So things that were super brut dry, things that were off dry, things that are semi-sweet, things that are red, that are white, that are rosé, that are orange, that are sparkling, that are still, just to get a diversity of options to see what the best we could find in all categories were. And then I tasted in a manner quite similar to how we taste at Wine Enthusiast, except that in this case it wasn't blind because I had been the one buying these bottles.
That's
So
true.
I knew
Yeah.
I knew each time what I was tasting. So in that sense, it's different. But I used a lot of the same criteria that we use to analyze wines when we're tasting them at Wine Enthusiast, in terms of structure, body, typicity, balance. And then for this article, because it was particularly geared at shopping on a budget, I also looked at value for money, which is again a deviation at Enthusiast. We judge blind, so I wouldn't know if it's value for money. So this was because this is a value focused.
Yeah, and it's important to cover all those sorts of ranges. So, and as a fellow New Yorker, I'm sure it hit you and it hit me and all of us hard when the Trader Joe's wine shop in Union Square closed a few years back. It was the only one, and they have since not replaced it.
Devastating.
So where was the Trader Joe's that you went that was closest to you?
Oh, Jake, thank you for asking. It was an odyssey. Yes, because here in New York we no longer have a Trader Joe's anywhere in state. I got in a car and I drove myself to Westwood, New Jersey. It's about an hour from where I live. And then in like a fun twist that's perhaps only relevant to me, the day that I went, they happened to be having a power outage. So I had to drive another hour and change down to Princeton, New Jersey, a town I'd never been to before. So I drove to kind of, I don't know if it's central or southern New Jersey, but I drove a distance to get myself down to Trader Joe's because I just know that there's a real your groundswell enthusiasm around not just TJ's, but a lot of grocery store wines. Like I would actually say the cult of Costco wines, the cult of Aldi wines. Like there's just a lot of really loyal shoppers to these supermarkets and to their wines in particular. And so I was eager to explore it. worth the miles, worth the gas money.
That's quite a journey. To be clear, there are no Trader Joe's wine shops in New York State anymore. There's a Trader Joe's in most neighborhoods, but they are just not allowed. They need to have a separate license to sell wine and liquor. So it's made things very difficult for those of us
It
who love the
does.
$2 chuck.
It does, it does. It's a shame, I think it's interesting because there's such a appetite, no pun intended, in New York City, but even just like all of the state for these bottles. It's been interesting not just these particular bottles, but for the chance to buy wine under $15 at a grocery store. A lot of the response I've gotten to this piece has been A, people telling me that their favorite TJ's wine wasn't in it, or B, this there's a lot of folks out there who just they love their pick. But B, also a lot of folks who are saying, "Oh my gosh, I miss my local TJ's wine shop." And so I think that it's interesting that there is this real appetite and eagerness to buy wine at the grocery store, just make it part of your everyday life.
Totally. Were there any standouts in that lineup?
There were. It was interesting to me. I was pleasantly surprised by the caliber of the French rosé that I tasted. It was a Bandol rosé, and the reason I say surprising is that that's a great region for a rosé. I love a rosé, but because rosé is super popular, anyone, not just a grocery store or chain, but anyone, you can kind of get away with putting some pretty mid wine in a bottle if it's
Right.
pink and it'll sell because people
Exactly.
love rosé. Yeah, and so I was really impressed by that bottle because you can kind of get away with worse and it'll still move. And that was a wine that while I wouldn't say it was the most complex contemplative wine I've ever tasted, I would love to serve that like with my friends, maybe on if someone has a patio, like listening
Mhm.
to Tyler the Creator with like a bowl of popcorn between us. Like it just it's like a
Wow.
very social fun wine.
Setting the scene, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
I'm
creating a
sure
vibe.
Tyler, the Creator, would love to be featured in that with the bandol. But beyond that, were there any patterns that in those 9 wines, that you saw pop out? I mean, bold flavors. Was there a lot of room for nuance in wines that don't, cost that much?
A great question. I definitely saw quality in what I would call like lesser sung varieties, less prevalent varieties in the United States. So
Okay.
there was more quality across the board in my experience among sort of like the Gruner Veltliners versus the Pinot Grigios. Because again, that wasn't necessarily that there were no good Pinot Grigios, but it was just something that I noticed that some of these kind of lesser sung in the United States varieties tended to be pretty high quality. And I think that's a really cool thing. I think it means that if you're just trying to buy a bottle of wine at the same time you're buying like dish soap and a box of tofu, like you can still also pick up a decent, a cool bottle. And like you don't have to be well versed in Austrian varieties to do so.
Yep.
I think that's really cool. The
Yeah.
other kind of like broad trend I saw, which perhaps I'm less like delighted by, but it is perfectly reasonable, is a lot of the wines that were marketed as dry, I found to have a decent amount of RS. So to have like a to me perception of residual sugar. And so
Interesting.
yeah, that was something that and I guess that like that's not necessarily a shocker because I guess, the stereotype of the American palate is we love sweets, right?
Me
And
too.
we're, Coca-Cola is our mother's milk, whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that perhaps that's not like a shock. And I think many of the super popular commercial, like California red blends often do to me present as sweets. I don't know their like makeup. I'm not here talking about their ingredients, but I have a very perceptible sweetness. And so that was something that I noticed also is a lot of the red blends, domestic red blends, I found them to be on the sweeter end of the spectrum, even when they were dry wines. And that speaks to a lot of things. Like that can be the style of winemaking, that can be some, additives. I don't know. As I said, I don't know. No,
Yeah.
I wasn't in the winery, so I'm not here saying there are additives or there aren't, but I just thought that was an interesting pattern that perhaps speaks to like a commercial potential of these wines.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so that I don't know, those were like kind of two broad patterns that I had that I saw rather. I don't know that I tasted anything that I thought was, the most complicated wine that I would want to,
Hmm.
invest in a climate controlled environment to cellar it. Like there was nothing that fit that bill for me. But everything's relative. Perhaps for someone else, they'd be like, "Nah, I'm going to put that down for 2 years and open her up." Then it just we're all individuals.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important distinction to talk about how these wines are not 99s out of 100 necessarily. I mean, I have no idea that could happen, but we're talking about wines that are very, very solid for their price. And yeah, right, you might not be cellaring these wines, but on a Tuesday night, you're buying dinner, you're buying your box of dish soap and tofu, like you said, and you want something that you can rely on, and there are some great picks out there. So I think that's the through line. But I think it's also about accessibility to a wider audience. I mean, whether that's like a little bit of RS in there, because our palate is needing that. That's part of it. And I think that it could be a really interesting way for people to explore other regions, other grapes, without necessarily having to dive in and dedicate a ton of time or money to it. I mean, if you can get a Gruner Veltliner for less than $12 that you think might be great, like that's a really awesome way to learn about it. So I think it's just expanding what people can be, drinking and what people are comfortable with.
Absolutely. You know what? I think you hit on something that's really important, to me personally, which is accessibility. There's so much within supermarket wines that you can say is good, is bad for wine. At the end of the day, people are there buying them. And so you want to be where your customers are. To me, what that evidence is that the fact that these are popular wines, that these are popular departments of a store, it shows that people wanna buy wine, and they wanna buy it in a non-ceremonious way. They don't want it to be a special occasion beverage. We do a lot of, I was gonna say pearl clutching, but perhaps that's a mean way to say it, finger pointing. We do a lot of finger pointing. There's all this generational warfare, like millennials do this and Gen Z does that, and I think, rather than getting mired in generational differences, I think what's interesting is just the fact that there's all sorts of people who are eager to pick up wine when they're picking up their cleaning supplies and their tofu and whatever else. There's all sorts of people who want to taste wine every day. They don't want it to be something that they invest in only for a special occasion or a ton of ceremony. That to me is a really cool market insight. As someone who cares about wine, who's excited to share wine with other people, there's no way I can look down my nose at shopping for wine anywhere.
Totally. I mean, we've seen studies that show that, much of off-premise wine purchasing happens at grocery stores. That's wine that you buy somewhere to drink somewhere else, so not at a restaurant, that kind of thing. What do you think that says about how people are actually engaging with wine?
I love that statistic for exactly that reason because people are eager to engage with wine. Not necessarily only because it's a birthday or, someone's getting married. You're eager to just have wine on a Tuesday night with your dinner, with your bowl of popcorn, your tofu, whatever it is you're enjoying that evening. I think that that's a really encouraging stat to me. Like that's exciting that there's over 50% of purchases off premise, like not in a bar or restaurant, are happening at the grocery store. These are folks who are just eager to drink wine day to day, make it part of their everyday life. That's encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, so that begs the question, are we as wine industry people taking these shoppers seriously enough?
I mean, I don't know that I don't know if I'm gonna say we do or don't take them seriously enough, but I think that it behooves us to take them seriously. I guess it behooves all of us to just treat one another, whether we are people who have made our careers in wine or we're people who have made our careers doing something else and just want a bottle to drink on a weekday at home between, doing the laundry and getting their kids' lunches packed, just people who are trying to just make their lives work and also enjoy a glass of wine at home. I think it benefits all of us to just look for ways to share wine. And so if that means investing time and attention as wine professionals in who's buying wine at supermarkets, okay, great. Let's dig into that. And if that means then if you're that casual weekday shopper and then you kind of fall for wine, you start thinking, oh, this is super interesting. And I bought this Cali red blend that I really enjoyed. And now I'm going to try a different one. Or, oh my gosh, my favorite Cali red blend is no longer stocked at Trader Joe's. I'll have to try something else. That's really wonderful. Like, I think that's how you get started getting kind of bit by the wine bug, which I don't come from a wine background. I feel so fortunate that I wound up working in this field.
Hmm.
There's so many ways to get into wine. Isn't it cool if you get into wine just doing your weekday grocery shopping?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a gateway. I remember a few years ago, I had a Riesling from North Carolina that was picked up at a Kroger in Kentucky. And I was just like thrown. It was just, it didn't cost a lot. But it was so interesting. And I think that there's a real opportunity for localized sort of shopping that might not be happening in a wine shop in New York City. We're not necessarily carrying Riesling from North Carolina. I mean, have you seen instances of that trend happening?
I have sadly never gotten to drink a Riesling from North Carolina. Just going to quickly say that I've
Someday.
sadly, yeah, one day. But here's the thing, right? Like our climate is changing, winemaking is changing. We might listen to this episode in 5 years, the colony that we live in on the moon. No, we might listen to this episode
Uh,
in 5 years and be like, oh my gosh, how funny it was that we didn't, know everything there is to know about the extraordinary winemaking capacities of the Carolinas. Like there's just so much about, across the United States that is forever in flux. I should say around the world, but also
yeah.
particularly with domestic wine. Like there's so much that is forever changing. And so I'm very open to tasting anything from anywhere. It's interesting. I tasted a Wisconsin fruit wine that I picked up at, I can't remember what chain it was. It was like a big grocery store chain because I was visiting Midwestern friends had like a lake house it's like their dad's lake house in the sort of northern Wisconsin, stunning part of the US. And I was at a grocery store and I was like, well, I'm interested in trying this Wisconsin made fruit wine. And so I think that's kind of exciting. If you're open and interested in wine, you might not like it all. They're not all winners, but like they're never all winners. We're all, we all have palates and we all have preferences. And if you're spending, $10 on a bottle and you don't love it, it's a bummer. Don't get me wrong. I hate losing $10.
Of course.
But
Yeah.
like all is not lost. There's all sorts of things you can do with the wine you don't like. That's also something that I think is kind of great about shopping for wine at a grocery store is even if you don't love it, if it's really, really within your budget, you can, you don't have to even pour it down the drain. You can pour it into ice cube trays and freeze it to cook with it later. You can bake with it.
True.
Like, don't worry, you'll live to fight another day.
Yeah. It's less of a barrier to entry to learn and have that experience.
Totally.
I think another really interesting angle is climate change, because there are regions. I mean, the U.S. is a relatively young wine region, if you want to call the U.S. a wine region, comparatively to other places around the world. So I don't know if we've figured everything out yet. And I think that climate change is a really interesting, horrible, awful wrench that has been thrown in the winemaking world. But it's going to open up new opportunities for places like Wisconsin, where you might not necessarily be growing vines. That might happen. And I think that could be a really interesting way for people to get in on the ground floor of regions like that. Is I went to a grocery store in Wisconsin and had this local wine and it was amazing. How did you guys not know about this? I'm going to start a vineyard here.
Right, right. Yeah, there's so much potential. I agree. I think that wine making, wine drinking, wine culture in the US is just comparatively so young, and that can be challenging, but that also can be huge potential.
Yeah. So for someone who's listening with $10 in their pocket and they're at a grocery store, a Kroger or an Aldi or a Costco or wherever, what should we look for in a wine?
This is the $1,000,000, $10
The
question.
$10.
Well, you know what I mean. It's $1,000,000 question when you have $10. I think the first thing I would do is look for geographic specificity.
Hmm.
That is your ace in the hole. Like a wine that says made in France versus a wine that says made in Vouvray it promises different things. And so Vouvray is part of the Loire Valley. So if I see that it says the super specific appellation within the Loire Valley, that means all of those grapes came from one geospecific place. It doesn't mean they all came from the same vineyard, but at least it gives me a sense of where they've been sourced from. If it says it's from France, they could have been grown anywhere in France under any conditions, radically different farming practices, radically different wineries. And so there's just less of a, how shall I say this? There's less likelihood that it'll turn out great because you're using really disparate products to make it, or you could be using disparate products. The sort of variables are greater the bigger your geographic designation is. So that's
True.
the first thing I look for, is just super specific geography. And it's okay if you're like, I don't know where Vouvray is. Like,
Yep.
we don't know where every place in the world is, but just look for something that is, what smaller than a country looks like. So just like look for the more specific, the better. That's something I found just across tasting. And I kind of find in general when shopping for wines. The other thing I would say is like, keep an open mind. I tend to drink very, high acid, dry wine, just my personal preference. And one of my favorites that I tasted for this particular piece was an off dry white. So like, just keep an open mind. You might end up finding something that you are super excited by, and you only spent $10 on it. So there you go. Now you have a whole new fun style, region, variety to dig into. So I think those would be my main things. Look for, they're they sound a bit opposed, I think, but trust me, it makes sense. Look for geographic specificity, but also keep your mind wide open.
Yeah. I would say also looking by varietal might be, if you're someone who already knows what you like, then that might be a good option. If I know I like Grenache, I'm more likely to like a Grenache from somewhere that I haven't tried yet than another varietal possibly. You also mentioned in your article to look by importer.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that it might be a little too inside baseball for like the beginner, but I think it's an important distinction. Like once you get a little more comfortable with wine, to look at those importers, and if it's from somebody that you trust, it's a pretty good bet that you might like it.
Absolutely. I think that's useful guidance when you're shopping for wine anywhere, in
Totally.
a tiny boutique wine shop that like is, playing the owner's band's record, and in a huge grocery store under fluorescent lights, right? Like I think that
Yep.
in both circumstances, knowing importers is so useful when you're shopping for international wines. It's not something everyone does, and I get it. We're busy. You have a rich inner life. You aren't spending your time flipping over bottles and reading the back. But I do think it's super useful once you learn the names of a couple. Like, it's almost like if you're, back in the day, if you like loved a certain, like, well, no, this is too old fashioned of a, I was going to say if you loved a record label, but no one does that anymore.
We might be like 10 years away from that.
But no, I think it's a, once you kind of find folks who have a similar aesthetic palette, sensibility to you, it can help guide the way you purchase. So if it's really important to you that to drink wines that are farmed organically, if biodynamic agriculture is important to you, you can seek out importers who specialize in those types of wineries. It's like a kind of shortcut to finding wines, because it's a huge category, wine, right? Finding wines that speak to your sensibilities, to what you value when you're shopping. All of us are kind of making purchasing decisions guided by something, be it cost, be it convenience, be it ideology. And so finding importers that kind of speak to your sensibilities it's just a nice way to kind of like, it narrows your choices in a good way. It helps make sense of a huge, huge, huge category.
Totally. Yeah. Well, this has been so fun. Thank you so much for joining. You can read Emily's full article in the Washington Post, the 9 bottles from Trader Joe's that she would serve to Tyler, the Creator, on a patio. Yeah, Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Jake.
Are you part of the Trader Joe's fandom? Let us know at podcast@wineenthusiast.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to your favorite shows. You can also go to wineenthusiast.com/podcast for more episodes and transcripts. I'm Jake Abrams. Thanks for listening.